In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted violently. About 230 square miles of forests around the volcano were destroyed in a matter of moments. All visible forms of life were wiped out as hot gases and ash swept down the valley. Before and after pictures of the same region a few miles from Mount St. Helens show the extent of the damage. More than 30 years have passed since the eruption. How do you think this area looks now? The area does not look the same as the 1978 photograph, but it has regained some of its original forested state. Scientists have used Mount St. Helens as a kind of living laboratory to study the changes that occur in a natural area following a dramatic environmental change. Their observations have reinforced some basic principles of ecology that were proposed 100 years ago. In the late 1890s, an American botanist named Henry Cowles observed that sand dunes rising up out of Lake Michigan showed gradual changes in vegetation. Cowles was struck by the sequence of change in the type of vegetation on the island. He observed that it started with very small, sparse plants near the water and gradually changed to dense, tall woods of mature trees farther from the water. Cowles recognized that this mirrored a sequence based on age. The vegetation was younger near the water and gradually became older farther away. He proposed that the wooded area was the oldest. Over time, it grew from a succession of vegetation, beginning with small vegetation, which gave way to successively larger and more long-lived species that resulted in the woods. This process in which different types of plants grow in an area over time is called ecological succession. Let's return to Mount St. Helens again to see how this concept fits in with events there. More than 30 years have passed since the eruption. In that time, the decimated forests have returned to their forested state. How do the changes at Mount St. Helens fit with Cowles' concept of succession? Changes at Mount St. Helens fit with Cowles' concept of succession because smaller plants were the first to grow, followed by larger plants and trees. The concept of ecological succession does not just apply to vegetation, but to all organisms living in an area. For example, animals that survive well in grass would tend to relocate when grass was replaced with small shrubs and eventually trees. Animals that live in deep forested areas would not move into an area until it provided a suitable environment. Ecological succession of animals can be represented in a chart. The bars below the animals represent the range of environments that each animal lives in during the course of ecological succession. There are two types of ecological succession, namely primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession occurs when the soil in an area is completely destroyed by events such as glaciation and landslides. It also occurs in newly formed volcanic islands and paved areas. The first stage of primary succession is the development of new soil. This occurs as organisms called pioneer species move in. Pioneer species such as lichens, mosses, and grasses can live in cracks and crevices on bare rock. As they grow, they break down the rock into smaller pieces, the beginning stages of soil formation. Gradually, as these pioneer species grow in number and begin to die, they contribute wastes and organic debris that continues the soil building process. Eventually, enough organic matter accumulates so that other plants can survive in the region, which moves the soil building process even further along. In what kind of climate is primary succession likely to happen faster, cold and dry, or warm and humid? Primary succession will probably happen faster in a warm and humid place because the rock will break down more quickly, and more kinds of organisms can live in those conditions. The succession is considered secondary when the disturbance does not totally destroy the soil. In these cases, plants can return to the area quickly because they have a place to take root. Fires, tornadoes, floods, and volcanic eruptions are all examples of disturbances that commonly lead to secondary succession. We know that succession is the result of ecosystem disturbance, and that the type of succession depends on whether soil is preserved during the disturbance. Compare the following images showing a late stage of succession in 3 different natural areas. In each case, the area matured into a late stage that is considered to be in equilibrium. This means it tends to remain stable. Areas like these are called climax communities. Although these communities appear to be permanent, they continue to undergo change. Why are the 3 climax communities shown in the images all so different from one another? Each climax community represents the most stable form of a community that exists under the particular environmental conditions of the area in terms of temperature, rainfall, and light exposure. Most modern ecologists now believe that it is almost impossible for ecosystems to reach climax and maintain equilibrium. Ecological succession never really ends because of disturbances such as fires, changing weather patterns, and invasion by new species. Primary succession would most likely follow which of the following processes? How does succession occur? To answer this question, observe what happens to both the light levels and the soil content in early stages of primary succession. Grass acts as a pioneer species to begin soil building. Some grass plants die and their stems and roots decay to add to the growing soil in the crevices. This allows other larger plants to move in. This moving in process is called colonization. Such intermediate stages in a succession are called seral communities. A community is influenced by factors such as humidity levels, soil pH, light levels, average temperature, areas for nesting, and areas used for hiding. Which of the following are conditions that could possibly change during succession? All of these could change as a result of succession. A community changes as it undergoes succession. It progressively increases in numbers and types of species, so its biodiversity increases. If the number of species that colonized the Mount St. Helens area was graphed, you would see a shape like the one shown here. A steady increase occurs in the early years, followed by a gradual leveling off period if no new disturbances occur. The leveling off of biodiversity indicates that the community has reached a balanced state. At this point, it has reached its climax state and is in a state of equilibrium. What evidence could a biologist gather to determine whether an area is a climax community? The biologist could count the number and types of species in the area at several different points in time to determine whether they are changing. If they are not changing, the community is at its climax. Which of the following would be expected to have its lowest level of biodiversity? To sum up, ecological succession is the process in which ecosystems change and develop over time. Primary succession occurs in areas where there is no soil. Secondary succession occurs in areas where a community had previously existed and soil has been established. When populations and the diversity of species remain stable, the community is considered to have reached a climax. A climax community represents the most stable form of a community that exists under the particular environmental conditions of the area. Although they may seem static, even climax communities are subject to ecological succession when new disturbances take place.